I'm Duncan Golostani. Our top stories. The US federal government faces a financial shutdown at midnight as politicians in Washington fail to back plans to authorize a spending bill. President Trump said his hopes of making a deal weren't looking good and claims the Democrats wanted a shutdown. Elsewhere, a new front in the conflict in Syria, but this time it's Turkey opening fire on Kurdish forces. Facing up to his crimes, we hear from more gymnasts about sexual abuse by the former Team USA doctor Larry Nassar. Hopes and fears for Peru. Pope Francis speaks about the future of the Amazon and its people. Hello, welcome, Graham. Within the past half hour, the US Senate has voted the spending bill and a government shutdown looks very likely. Senators failed to back a stopgap motion which would temporarily keep government departments going for another 4 weeks. So now, unless a compromise can be found in the next hour, many parts of US government will shut down, although essential services including national security and air traffic control will continue. Let's go live now to Washington and our correspondent David Willis, who's there. So David, time is pretty much up.
Yes, dramatic events unfolding here in the nation's capital right now. In actual fact, Duncan, the vote has been rejected in the Senate. The Republicans who tabled that 4-week financial extension, failing to get the support that they needed, the additional support from Democrats there in the upper house, having passed this bill in the lower house last night, Thursday night here. So unless some sort of compromise is reached within the next, less than an hour, 55 minutes or so, there will be a government shutdown here. It's an embarrassment, a considerable embarrassment for the president, Donald Trump, a man who's long branded himself the ultimate deal maker, of course. He met for over an hour with the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer today, but although initial signs seem promising, the two men clearly failed to reach an agreement to keep the federal government ticking over, and so it will shut down. The irony of this and the embarrassment of this being that the first day of this shutdown will be on the same day that marks the first anniversary of Donald Trump's inauguration.
Yeah, the timing is quite something, isn't it, David? So what exactly will happen in less than an hour? What are Americans going to notice over the weekend?
Well, on Monday, and possibly as early as this weekend, federal government workers will get, some of them anyway, instructions to stay at home on a Monday. They will be furloughed. And of course, if this goes on, then their pay could be affected as well. Essential services, prisons, the White House itself, the Pentagon, for example, will continue to function. So will troops continue to be deployed, those that are deployed overseas. But this will have implications the longer it goes on. The last shutdown of any size was back in 2013, and 800,000 government workers were furloughed over the course of 16 days.
It's not going to do much for Americans' faith in their elected representatives, is it? Where do you see blame falling in the coming weeks and months if it does go to a prolonged shutdown?
Well, there was a poll conducted for the Washington Post which suggested that by quite a considerable margin that the blame for this for most Americans go to the Republicans in Congress and to the president himself. But, you know, this doesn't bring particularly good news to either party, the Democrats or the Republicans, ahead of the midterm elections. Neither wants to be seen bringing the government to its knees financially, if you like, with those all-important seats up for grabs in November. It is an embarrassment for Donald Trump because he has, as I mentioned, branded himself this deal maker par excellence, and the very fact that he met for more than an hour with Chuck Schumer at the White House today, one-on-one. We hear that just the White House Chief of Staff, John Kelly, was the only other person present, but yet still failed to convince Chuck Schumer to drop this specification that the bill also include some sort of mention of the so-called dreamers, the 800,000 people in this country illegally whose right to remain expires in just a few weeks' time.
A night of drama in Washington. David, thank you very much. Willis in Washington for us. Well, while the battle over the US government budget has been rumbling on, there's also been a significant announcement about America's future military policy. Presenting the changes, the Defense Secretary Mattis said that instead of a focus on terrorism, US national security is now making it a priority with great powers like China and Russia. Here's how he put it.
We face growing threats from revisionist powers as different as China and Russia are from each other. Nations that do seek to create a world consistent with their authoritarian models, pursuing veto authority over other nations' economic, diplomatic, and security decisions. Rogue regimes like North Korea and Iran persist in taking outlaw actions that threaten regional and even global stability. Oppressing their own people and shredding their own people's dignity and human rights, they push their warped views outward.
The US Defense Secretary James Mattis there. Well, China and Russia have slammed the changes. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said the US was striving to prove its global leadership through confrontation. Beijing accused Washington of having a Cold War mentality. Turkey has begun a new intervention in the conflict in Syria by launching an offensive against Kurdish-held territory near its border. Ankara, which has long fought Kurdish separatists within its own country, is now shelling Kurdish militia in the Afrin region. It's threatening an all-out ground offensive. From inside Syria, our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, reports.
Shots across the border. The target isn't really Syria. It's a Kurdish now controlling the land all too close to Turkey. Tanks and troops are also moving into position, the de facto start of a ground invasion. That's what the defense minister calls this. Its sights are set on Afrin. Syria's Kurds have been in charge for the last 5 years. They're vowing to keep it. We will fight to the last drop of blood, they declare. We will stand with Afrin. Turkey calls them terrorists, linked to its main enemy at home, the Turkish Kurds in the PKK. All this is opening up another major crisis inside Syria's old war. Just to the south, the Syrian army is pushing ahead with its own offensive to retake ground held by hardline Islamists. As fighting intensifies, so too the humanitarian crisis. 200,000 people are now on the run, heading north, adding to pressure on Turkey's border. Abu and Mohammed among them.
I got the kids and put them in the car and we were off. We came here with nothing.
In some places, they can't run away. There were more airstrikes today in East Ghouta, a besieged area on the edge of Damascus under rebel control. Thousands are now living in basements. This baby's life begins underground.
This child is only 20 hours old, born in the bombardment and destruction, the siege here in Ghouta. No one can see our suffering.
All the children here have known nothing but war. They have to make the most of it. They've no inkling of the complexities of this conflict, but they live with its cost every day. Lise Doucette, BBC News, Syria.
2 former US Olympic gymnasts have been testifying in the case involving former Team USA doctor Larry Nassar. The pair, who won gold at London 2012, are among more than 100 of sexual abuse. He's already facing 60 years in prison after pleading guilty to child pornography charges. Our correspondent, Rajini Vaidyanathan, has been speaking to one of his victims.
They were nicknamed the Fierce Five, America's gold-winning Olympic gymnastics team. But 4 of these young women were hiding a dark secret. They were abused by this man, their team doctor Larry Nassar, who's been described as a monster in court. Today, team captain Ali Reisman was the latest to share her story.
You are so sick, I can't even comprehend how angry I feel when I think of you. You lied to me and manipulated me to think that when you treated me, you were closing your eyes because you had been working hard when you were really touching me, an innocent child, to pleasure yourself.
Seen here at the London 2012 Games, Ali was just 18 years old when her team won gold. But behind the scenes, Larry Nassar was abused.
Larry was the Olympic doctor and he molested me at the 2012 London Olympic Games. Abusers, your time is up. The survivors are here, standing tall, and we are not going anywhere.
Her teammate Jordan Weber also shared her story in court today.
Our bodies were all hanging by a thread when we were in London. Who was the doctor that USAG sent to keep us healthy and help us get through? The doctor that was our abuser. The doctor that is a child molester.
For years, there have been concerns about Larry Nassar, but many survivors say they were ignored. His victims weren't just decorated Olympians, but the children of family friends and state-level gymnasts like Gwen Anderson. A champion athlete who competed for the state of Michigan, Gwen is seen here at the age of 14, just 12 when she first received treatment from Larry Nassar. Instead, he molested her time and time again.
To have your name and your face and your story out for everybody to see is a scary thing. He was my safe place. He was going to protect me, and he took that and he that against all of us.
For so many, this was a doctor they trusted implicitly.
For the record, go to hell.
Tom Brennan was Gwen's coach and once a close friend of Larry Nassar's.
Did you have any idea of what he was doing?
None. I had zero idea. We had the utmost trust for that man, and that's where we all went wrong.
All this week, young women have packed this small courtroom as they get to do what few survivors of sexual abuse ever have the chance to: directly confront their attacker. There's been a real sense of collective empowerment here. Already, more than 80 women have shared their testimonies in this case, and every day, more are coming forward, saying they want to share their stories too.
Tonight, the list of women who say they want to speak out has grown to as many as 120. The judge says every woman who wants to face Larry Nassar in court will be given the chance to. Rajini Vaidyanathan, BBC News, Lansing, Michigan.
OK, let's take a look at some more stories making the news now. The Colombian authorities say that the number of Venezuelans fleeing a severe economic crisis to take up residency in Colombia has jumped by more than 60% in the last 6 months. Migration officials said more than 550,000 Venezuelans are now living in Colombia, mostly illegally. A jury in Canada has returned not guilty verdicts for 3 men who were charged with criminal negligence following the Lac Mégantic rail disaster in 2013. 47 people died when a train carrying nearly 8 million litres of shale oil came off the rails and exploded. The 3 former railway workers had been accused of leaving the train unattended and allowing it to roll away without any control. Do stay with us here on BBC News, still to come. Looking for hope, Pope Francis speaks about the future for the people of Peru.
The people of Saigon have just heard that at last there is to be a ceasefire. The reaction of American servicemen was predictable.
I'm going home. I'm going home.
Demonstrators waiting for Mike Gatting and his rebel cricket team were attacked with tear gas and set upon by police dogs. Anti-apartheid campaigners say they will carry on the protests throughout the tour.
They called him the Butcher of Lyon. Klaus Altmann is being held on a fraud charge in Bolivia. But the West Germans want to extradite him for crimes committed in wartime France. There he was the Gestapo chief Klaus Barbie.
Millions came to bathe as close as possible to this spot, a tide of humanity that's believed by officials to have broken all records.
Welcome back. You're watching BBC News, the latest headlines. The US federal government faces a financial shutdown at midnight. President Trump has blamed Democrats for failing to back plans to authorize a spending bill. And Turkey has a Kurdish militia in northern Syria ahead of a threatened ground offensive. Pope Francis has visited a remote rainforest region in Peru to sound a stark warning about the future of the Amazon. The pontiff says the area and its indigenous communities are being exploited for their natural resources and face a threat like never before. Virginia Langeberg reports.
Pope Francis arrived in Puerto Maldonado on the edge of the Amazon rainforest to a resoundingly warm reception from those perhaps too young to fathom the scale of the issues their communities face. The pontiff was not just a guest for these Amazonian tribes, but a powerful mouthpiece for their plight, protecting the land they see slipping away from them. This once tranquil part of the world has fallen victim to an illegal gold rush, which has spawned a billion-dollar black market that's destroying the habitat and has seen the introduction of human trafficking and violent criminal networks.
Los pueblos amazónicos originarios
The native Amazonian people have probably never been so threatened on their own land as they are at present. The Amazon is a territory that is being disputed on many fronts. On the one hand, pressure being exerted by great business interests seeking petroleum, gas, timber and gold, and on the other, the threat against the territories also from the perversion of several policies that promote conservation without considering humans.
This is the second and final leg of the pontiff's week-long South American visit, and the first time the Pope has denounced environmental degradation in a place as threatened and isolated as this.
I have a feeling of peace and tranquility. He has comforted us with his soft words telling us you can change this world and continue with our customs and traditions.
Pope Francis also feels the worry about the loss of forest in which we, native people, are affected on a social, environmental and cultural level.
From the rainforest region, the pontiff then travelled to Peru's capital, Lima, to meet with authorities there. But getting there proved a hurdle, with the car carrying the Pope suffering a flat tyre, to switch vehicles in the middle of the motorway. Successive political leaders have tried and failed to slow the illegal gold rush, but the Amazon will be the focus of a World Bishops' meeting taking place in October next year. Virginia Langeberg, BBC News.
The family of the American rock star Tom Petty, who died last year at the age of 63, have revealed that his death was the result of an accidental drug overdose. An autopsy report has shown that the singer was taking a mix of painkillers to deal with medical issues. Tom Petty sold more than 80 million albums around the world in a career spanning 5 decades. Saturday marks a year since Donald Trump's inauguration as president. United States. A property billionaire and a political novice, he was dismissed by many as lacking the skills and experience needed for the top office. 12 months on, how supportive are Americans of their leader? Laura Trevelyan has been to Pennsylvania to meet Trump voters and those less convinced by their president.
The Mon Valley in western Pennsylvania is the birthplace of US Steel. This factory was once owned by the 19th century magnate Andrew Carnegie. In its heyday, it employed thousands. Donald Trump tapped into the sense of industrial decline, winning by promising to put America first. Over lunch, I asked Trump voters for their verdict on year one.
He seems like he cares about the working class, cares about the people who are trying to make a living and have big businesses and things like that, and small businesses. I think he cares about that kind of stuff.
Some of the stuff he does I agree with, like the tax cuts, looking out for the working class people like that. But I'm not a big fan of all the rants on social media. I think they can do away with all that.
How are you feeling about that vote?
A little disappointed.
Juan Lacey, a small business owner in the Mon Valley, hoped Mr. Trump would run government like a CEO. So does this former Obama voter regret switching to Trump?
When I went into the voting booth and I pulled the lever, I was satisfied. I'm having buyer's remorse.
Why?
Because it's not consistent.
John Fetterman's a Democrat in Trump country.
But you get out into some of these areas that no one's visited, no one's taken the time to care, left it really open and ripe for someone to step in like a Donald Trump and say, hey, I'm the guy that can fix this.
The populist mayor of Braddock, with a tattoo of the town's zip code, counsels his party to understand Trump's appeal.
It's got to be more than, Trump's awful, vote for us. And again, I think it has to come back to like earnest, progressive, populist message.
In his inaugural address a year ago, Donald Trump promised people in towns like Braddock that he'd give them back their jobs and their dreams. There's an early electoral test here in Pennsylvania of whether the voters feel he's delivering. There's a special election in the state, in what should be a safe Republican seat, but the president's taking no chances.
A real friend and a spectacular man, Rick Saccone.
That's the candidate here. Mr. Trump doesn't want to lose this election, and he was in the Mon Valley Thursday with this message.
Very simply, your paychecks will be much bigger because under our tax cuts, you will be keeping more of your hard-earned money.
The question is whether Mr. Trump can get the credit here for an improving economy, or if the heat generated by his tweets and feuds is distracting even his own voters.
Laura Trevelyan reporting. Now, but engineers and entrepreneurs believe a Hyperloop is not so much a fantasy but the future of travel. Our technology correspondent Rory Ketland-Jones went to the Nevada desert.
We're heading through the Nevada desert north of Las Vegas for a glimpse of what its backers claim is the future of transport. This is Hyperloop, an attempt to send passengers hurtling at 700 miles an hour through a vacuum tube. Many think that's far-fetched, but this project got the backing last year of Virgin, with Sir Richard Branson becoming chairman. In this 500-metre test track, they say they have shown that the technology works, though they've not yet put any human beings on board.
I think my background in spacecraft engineering has given me the skill set to be able to...
Engineering, a space scientist recruited from NASA, sees no reason why people might be scared.
The Hyperloop is a maglev train in a vacuum system, or a vacuum tube. And so you can also think of it as an aircraft flying, so people don't have any issue flying in airplanes, and people don't have any issue going in maglev trains. This is simply combining the two, and it allows you to be more energy efficient.
This isn't the only project. The electric car tycoon Elon Musk, who originally floated the whole idea, has proposed a tunnel under Los Angeles that could carry cars or be transformed into a Hyperloop. The Virgin Hyperloop team have said they could take passengers from London to Edinburgh in 50 minutes, or cut the journey between New York and Boston to under half an hour.
But making this work in the real world will mean running several of these pipes
alongside each other over long distances, perhaps underground. And convincing governments that that is realistic is going to prove, well, pretty challenging.
Even if some governments do share that vision, they'll face another challenge: finding the money and the public support to build this kind of structure many miles across or under their countries. Rory Catlin-Jones, BBC News, Nevada.
OK, let's go back to our story, which is that senators look like they have failed in their attempt to pass a bill which would have put in place a short-term spending bill to fund the federal government. This dramatic late-night session there going on in Washington, D.C. You can see the live pictures there. Republicans failed to reach the magic number, which was 60, in order to get that bill passed. It means that in about half an hour's time, local time, officially the US federal government will not be able to fund their agencies. And that will have repercussions in the coming days. You're watching BBC News. I'm Duncan Golostani. Bye for now.
Hi there.